Have you ever been stuck in an argument about some big idea? Words like education or learning or even success, and you just feel like you're going in circles? You talk and talk, but you never actually get anywhere? Well, it turns out there's a really good reason for that. And in this explainer, we are going to get to the bottom of it.
It all boils down to what the philosopher Jonas F. Soltis calls the centaur hunter's problem. You see, when we argue about these huge concepts, we usually act like we're hunting for a single perfect definition, like there's one true meaning of the word out there, and if we just look hard enough, we're going to find it.
But Soltis asks this brilliant question. What if we're not hunting for an elephant, something we all know exists and can point to? What if we're actually hunting for a centaur, a mythical creature that we're never ever going to find, no matter how hard we look? And that right there, that question gets to the very heart of the problem.
I mean, think about it. The elephant hunter is searching for something real, but the centaur hunter, they're on a total wild goose chase. And that's why so many of our arguments just fall apart. We're all out there hunting for a centaur, this one perfect definition that, for these big, messy ideas, just doesn't exist.
So if hunting for the one true definition is a dead end, what's the alternative? Well, we have to completely change our approach. Instead of hunting for something, we need to start building something. And to do that, we need the right set of mental tools. We need what you might call a philosopher's toolkit.
Like Soltis says here, you wouldn't try to teach someone carpentry without showing them how to actually use a hammer or a saw, right? It's the same idea. We can't learn to think clearly about complicated ideas without first learning how to use the basic tools of philosophical analysis. And these aren't just abstract theories, they're really practical tools for bringing clarity to confusion.
All right, so we're going to build out our toolkit with three really essential instruments. First, the generic X-ray to find a concept's core. Then, the differentiation map to explore all its different meanings. And finally, a conditions checklist to know exactly when it applies. So let's get to work.
Okay, our first tool is what I like to call the generic X-ray. Just think of it as a way to see right through the surface of a word and identify its fundamental skeleton. The essential features that make it what it is.
Now, the fancy term for this is generic type analysis. The whole goal here is to pinpoint the core DNA of a concept by figuring out what features something absolutely must have to be considered an example of it, and just as important, what separates it from all the things that it isn't.
And the process is kind of like being a detective. First, you gather your obvious yes cases and your obvious no cases. Second, you look at all your yeses and try to pull out what they all have in common. Third, you test those features against your no's to make sure they hold up. And finally, you refine your list. It's a really simple but super powerful loop.
Okay, let's see this in action with the word discipline. We all kind of know that physics and history are disciplines, right? And we can probably all agree that water skiing and flower arranging probably aren't. So by comparing what the first group has that the second one is missing, things like a unique body of knowledge or a specific method of inquiry, we start to get that X-ray view of what a discipline actually is at its core.
All right, let's grab our second tool. This one is the differentiation map. This is for all those really tricky words that don't just have one single meaning, but actually cover a whole lot of different ground. This tool helps you draw a map of all that territory.
So we call this a differentiation type analysis. Instead of looking for just one set of features that fits everything, this method actively searches for all the different ways a word gets used. The goal is to identify and separate these different meanings so you stop accidentally confusing one for another.
And creating this map is a pretty straightforward four-step journey. You start by just gathering examples of the word being used in all sorts of different ways. Then, you group those uses into distinct categories or types. Next, you pinpoint what makes each of those categories unique. And finally, you test your new map with some fresh examples to make sure it holds up. For example, take the phrase subject matter. Is it just a pile of facts? No way. It can mean factual knowledge, knowing that Columbus sailed in 1492. Or it could be about skills, knowing how to do long division. It can even refer to dispositions, like being curious, or attainments, like having an appreciation for music. Once you map these out, you can stop arguing at cross purposes.
Okay, on to our third and final tool, the conditions checklist. This one is less about what a word is in general and more about when it's actually appropriate to use it. You can think of it as a checklist you run through to see if a concept really fits a specific situation. Formally, this is a conditions type analysis, and the goal here is to identify the full set of conditions that absolutely must be in place for a concept to be used correctly. It's all about context. To see what I mean, let's ask a simple question.
What makes an explanation feel truly satisfying? You know that feeling, right? Someone can explain something to you, but it just doesn't click. So why is that? What conditions are missing?
Well, analysis suggests there are 3 key conditions. First, it has to be the relevant type of explanation. If you ask why, you need a why answer. Second, it has to be psychologically complete for you. No confusing gaps, no jargon you don't understand. And third, it has to be compatible with your existing beliefs. An explanation that contradicts everything you already know to be true is just never going to feel satisfying.
So now we've got our 3 tools, the X-ray, the map, and the checklist. Let's put them to work and see why this toolkit is so incredibly valuable for sorting out real-world arguments.
Imagine a debate about keeping Latin in schools. One person says, Latin is so dull. The other fires back, no, Latin is exciting. This is what we'd call a disagreement in attitude. It's a clash of feelings. But then one says, studies show Latin doesn't help with English vocabulary. And the other replies, well, my students' English grades always improve. Now that is a disagreement in belief, a clash over facts. These are 2 completely different types of arguments.
And that is the whole point. This is what's so crucial. These philosophical tools let you diagnose the true source of a disagreement. Are you actually arguing about feelings, about facts, or about the definition of a word itself? Because once you know what the argument is really about, you can finally stop talking in circles and start having a genuinely productive conversation.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to take away. Think about a powerful, complicated word like success. Is it just one single thing, or is it many different things? What are its absolutely essential features? And under what conditions can you truly say someone is successful? Now that you have the toolkit, how would you even begin to find an answer?